Journalists are necessary in a functioning democracy, but they have to uphold certain key responsibilities. I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. We're currently in an unfortunate situation where many polls are citing a declining public trust and respect for journalism, and further media in general. Although this is not totally undeserved, it still is a tragedy. Now, why is it a tragedy? The answer essentially boils down to journalism is a key component to a properly functioning democracy. When journalism slides, it opens the door to mass corruption. Now, at the same time, I also say it's not totally undeserved because journalism has in some sense jumped into that hole themselves. The broader media industry has done very little to restore their reputation. Allegations of severe partisan bias and cover-ups and all these things have come to light. It seems like social media has exacerbated that issue, but the consequences are very real. People are looking at these once beloved institutions and they're realizing they may not be as perfect as they once imagined. Now, it's up for debate if there ever was a golden era of media to begin with, but what's not up for debate is the key role that journalism plays in a society. It's a necessity. Their fundamental function is to hold power accountable to the people. And how they do that is by exposing the truth. That's their whole job description. Expose the truth to the populace so the populace can hold people accountable. Otherwise, you end up in a situation where those in power, whether it's politicians or C-suite executives or anyone of that nature, they end up doing things that never get to the public's ear. How can you hold accountable these people who have no bosses if nobody hears about what they're doing? There is nobody above the food chain to be supervising President Joe Biden or Justin Trudeau or Jeff Bezos or anyone of that nature. They call the shots at the top dog, but the one entity they do have to care about is the population, the citizens at large, because they influence things. When it comes to politicians, they're the ones who elect you. When it comes to corporations, they're the ones who fund you. They pay for your services or your products. To lose the support of the population, it's a disaster for you. So if there's one group that they're going to be beholden to, it's that. It's you. It's the citizen. But for that power dynamic to work, you have to be informed. And we rely on journalism and the media to do that for us. It's very common for individuals to have grievances with certain key institutions. You can take the World Health Organization, the CDC, the Senate, lawyers, judges, politicians, whatever. Any of these parties. A functioning media is supposed to act as the medium for the people to get the truth from. The average citizen might not believe everything that's coming out of a group with such a clear agenda. Now, recall what I just said before. As a journalist, your goal really is to disseminate the truth. That's a goal that everyone can get behind. And if you're holding true to your mandate, there is a level of trust that comes with that. The individual might be questioning what something like the National Mortgage Association is saying about housing because they have a clear bias. But if journalists are doing their job and they're separating the wheat from the chaff, they're exposing the inaccuracies and giving you the truth of the claims, then that's something you can easily digest. And honestly, we do need this because as a citizen, the average citizen, you have a lot going on in your life. You don't have the ability to fact check everything. So you need this third party to act as the intermediary for you. But the question of if journalism is doing that still today is up in the air. And we'll get to that more when I talk about the responsibilities. Right now, we're focusing on the necessity for this job. Journalists also act as a safeguard for things like your freedom of speech and expression. They have the right, and they probably use it more than the average person, to say what has to be said. Their role fundamentally has to have an element of speaking unpopular truths, speaking things that are going to upset people, being critical of certain things. You might even call it daring to offend those in power who can presumably do things to curb that. But still, there's a certain element of courage there, and as that bastion of free speech, those on the front lines, they're there to shield against any encroachments against it as a first stop. Otherwise, how can they even do their job? If certain topics become taboo to talk about, that's been a failure on journalism and the media more broadly to uphold something that's key to them truly being able to speak the truth to people. If certain positions on things like the abortion debate or gun rights or the presidential candidate themselves, things like that, of that nature, if certain answers become expected of you and veering away from that gets you labeled a pariah, well, journalism isn't able to function as it should be. Getting to the truth is more nuanced than some may like. It's clearly not a black and white situation most times. There are multiple sides to hear, and a careful analysis of the multivariable factors to discuss. There is no room for taboos here. And interestingly enough, if journalism and media is responsible for erecting those taboos to begin with, then we're really in trouble. And that's something to think about. To what role, to what extent, have they contributed to the current toxicity of politics that we're seeing right now? To change gears, now I want to talk about the responsibility of journalists, how they should be acting to truly be deserving of the public's respect. First of all, they have to be objective as a default. Remember, we talked about a couple times already that their job fundamentally is to speak the truth, so the citizens can hold power and powerful people accountable. Sure, you can be opinionated here and there, but that should be the exception. It should be rare and clearly stated when you are doing that. Your fundamental job isn't to give your take and convince people about certain facts, it's to speak the truth. It's to be objective and to be fair and to cover both sides of a story. If you fail to do that, you're going to be alienating a large portion of the population, as we've seen with things like Trump coverage. Now, however you feel about this individual, it's clear that half the country in America liked him. And if popular journalists and media outlets are showing nothing but animus to everything, they can't congratulate very clear wins that occurred during those 4 years. All they're doing is condemning every single thing. Well, there goes your opportunity to be held up in that objective light. People are going to turn away from you, and you're going to drive a wedge between the left and the right. There has to be an element of objectivity here, an element of being able to speak your mind without fearing the backlash from your own in-group. Luckily in Canada, things aren't as bad as in America. When I was on the spot here thinking about examples to say, mostly American ones came up, but this is occurring in Canada to a lesser degree. There are certain taboo topics like immigration, for example, where we already know what the popular media outlets are going to say and the popular journalists. They rarely are going to present contrary arguments to the popular narratives in the mainstream. But that's a disservice to the reader. Really, what should be going on here is they're simply stating the facts of the matter. And you let the readers decide where they stand given that. You don't try to ram down your opinions on people. That's distasteful. And can you blame them for turning away from you when that's all that seems to be happening? I partially blame social media for the transformation we've seen here. It seems like the way to get clicks and draw revenue and whatnot is to say punchlines and buzzwords and don't really expand into nuance. Simply give a flashy headline that's going to evoke emotions like anger and rage or sadness or things like that. And sure, you're going to get your conversion metrics, but what's that doing to people? What's that doing to people's view of you as an institution? A journalist who is clearly afraid of certain things or in favor of others is going to come off as someone that many people don't want to read. Unless you think just like them, then sure, the draw for confirmation bias will kick in. But if we're trying to cast a wide net, if we're trying to help the citizens of a country converge on key points of life to establish certain elements of the truth, then that's going to be problematic. There has to be some shared strands of logic that people hold to have a successful conversation, argument, and debate. There has to be a baseline establishment of truth to go off on. If people can't even agree about the fundamentals, talking about the details are going to be useless. These fundamentals, these elements of truth, they have to come from the media and journalism. It's a key responsibility. Then, sure, people can digress and then we can talk about opinions, but we have to establish that baseline For example, if we can't even agree that the pandemic is real, if we can't agree that it's something that has to be taken seriously, and to switch gears to something else, if we can't agree that encroachments onto things like freedom of speech are generally bad, if we can't agree that a government who can take away certain freedoms at a whim is not a good thing, well, how are we going to converge on a path forward, a mutual path forward? If, generally speaking, mainstream media is going to paint the right-wing conservative arm of a country as being evil, racist, bigoted, not acceptable in the 21st century, and they're very lenient to those on the left, and they're letting things slide there that would never pass on their right-wing equivalent, well, how are we going to find that mutual path forward? When you consider the fact that the split in countries like Canada and America is very close to 50-50. Now in Canada, you look at the popular vote, and actually more citizens voted for the Conservative Party than the Liberals, for example. It's just that the way we have the system set up, with the seats that are shaked up, with Trudeau getting that minority government. But things like this are sowing distrust and driving wedges between populations where there need not be, especially coming from a once believed objective source of information, the media and journalism. I should also clarify this. Now, I am differentiating between journalists and media because journalists are the employees of the media channels, and they have different perspectives here. Many of these media channels are companies, they're corporations. Take the New York Times, for example. Did you know they're publicly traded? They have stocks. And to think that they're operating differently behind the scenes when compared to the likes of Amazon and Apple, that would be a mistake. They're trying to drive shareholder value. It's a corporation from top to bottom. Now, the journalists, though, they have a different responsibility. The New York Times themselves might be trying to generate profits, but the journalists should still be holding that key messaging of impartial, objective, truth-telling speech. They should remain free of these business model pressures, or they should at the very least be speaking out against them. They should be trying to maintain objectivity where possible. Now, from that shareholder perspective, looking at the companies like the New York Times and the Washington Post through that lens, you begin to understand more and more why they become polarized themselves. They're trying to generate clicks. They're trying to bring value to advertisers. People who don't click through to your articles, they're not providing much value to your bottom line. So how do you increase that? How do you increase the money going into your pocket, basically? Well, you have to give them a reason to click through. So when you see these companies posting on social media and the ads they're putting out, they're going to be doing it in a way to evoke the most intense and potent emotions they can from you. Why? Because they need you to follow through. They need to engage you. Now, usually the raw facts are a little bit more boring than a sensationalized, opinionated article. There are certain terms that can be dropped in a headline that they know is going to generate an uproar and get them those views. Is that true journalism, though? The answer is no, it's not. The truth might not be pretty and enticing at all times, but that's still the fundamental mandate here. Now, the trade-off there, the erosion of that truth-telling, it might not impact you today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually people are going to become keen to that. And what's going to happen is you're going to create echo chambers where those who are hearing your sensationalized headlines are only those who care about them. And the other half of the population who's become aware of the partisanship here, who are desiring something more akin to objective analysis, they're going to be looking elsewhere, but where else can they look when pretty much all popular media channels are beholden to this bottom line rule? There are competitors like Substack now, where content creators are just being paid by subscribers. They're cutting out the entire business model. The end user, the end reader, is funding it through a subscription. Now, it remains to be seen how effective that's going to be. Do we think that's going to replace the New York Times, CNN, CBC in Canada, CP24? Well, that remains to be seen. But there is a shakeup that has to be had here. The incentives are just not aligned for proper journalism anymore, if it ever existed in the first place. I will say, though, not all of this is the fault of the organizations. There is also a fault on the reader and us as citizens as well. It's true that objective, truth-telling journalism isn't exactly the most interesting at certain times, but if we're going out of our way and showing companies that we're engaging with craziness, that the sensationalization is working on us, then how can we blame them for responding to that incentive? There is a change of behavior that has to happen on our end too. It's a joint effort. And it is a shame to be having this discussion because journalism is essential to a functioning democracy. We need sources of truth for us to be able to do things like keep a government under rein, to do things like have our will expressed in proportion with what's actually going on in reality, to not be swept away by confusion and moral hysteria at every little thing, to have a perspective on how a country should be moving forward in unity together. Despite differences, we have to have a baseline truth. When popular media and journalism becomes beholden to certain ideas, then how can we function? How can we trust the truth sayers, quote unquote, whose job it is to inform us? When some of these truth sayers are out here causing and contributing to much of the political divide that we're seeing, you really have to take a step back and understand what's gone wrong here. I think it's fair to say that journalism, media, you can lump in social media to that, have done more to divide populations across countries than to unite them. In the realm of journalism, these were supposed to be people who could identify truth and they're supposed to be held as respectable, objective figures. Is that the case anymore? Well, you can decide. With media and social media, these were tools that were supposed to connect us in a global world. Have they done that? Or have they further divided us? These are the things that have to be discussed and thought about. I think it's clear that our current trajectory is not a good one. And what awaits us at the destination could be shocking to many people who have not considered the sharp decline that we're on. When more and more people say they cannot trust the media and journalism, where are they going to turn to? It seems like a breeding ground for conspiracy theory, radical thinking, and overall craziness. Being powered by the tools themselves that are supposed to combat that to begin with. It is paradoxical, but that's the current situation. Time will tell how things transpire here, but it's clear that there is work to be done on both the institution front and that of the citizenry. So with that, it now brings us to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a review and share. That'll help us grow. And you can find me online at perryplatform.org and on social media at perryplatform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.